The gunshot tore through the dusty Wyoming afternoon like a curse, silencing the mockingbirds that had been Lucy Barton's only companions on the long walk home. At 22, she'd become both widow and mother in the same merciless week, burying her husband James under the cottonwood tree while their newborn daughter slept in a basket beside the fresh-turned earth. That had been 3 months ago, and the townsfolk of Redemption Springs still whispered behind handkerchiefs when she passed, their eyes following her with a pity that burned worse than the August sun of 1879. "There she goes again," came the whisper as Lucy adjusted the worn leather satchel over her shoulder, the letters inside it rustling like autumn leaves. Still writing those letters to railroad companies, as if they'd build a stop for a town barely on the map. Lucy quickened her pace, the dust of Main Street clinging to the hem of her black morning dress. She'd written 17 letters since James died, to railroad executives, to government officials, to anyone who might listen. Redemption Springs was dying, just as surely as the cattle during last year's drought. Without the railroad, the town would become another ghost settlement, forgotten beneath Wyoming's vast blue sky. "Mrs. Barton," called Mr. Pembroke from the general store doorway. "Another rejection today?" His voice carried down the street, ensuring everyone within earshot could enjoy her humiliation. Lucy clutched the satchel tighter. "Not a rejection, Mr. Pembroke. A request for more information about our town's resources." The lie fell easily from her lips. The Northern Pacific had indeed rejected her proposal, just as all the others had. But hope was all she had left. Laughter erupted from the saloon as the afternoon drinkers caught wind of the exchange. "She's writing to the railroads again," someone shouted, and fresh guffaws followed. Lucy lifted her chin and continued walking. Hope wasn't foolishness, it was survival. Without it, she might as well lie down beside James in the hard Wyoming soil. The small cottage at the edge of town appeared on the horizon, its weathered boards standing defiant against the prairie wind. Lucy's pace quickened. Inside that humble home waited Hannah, her tiny daughter, being watched over by elderly Mrs. Winters from next door. "Land's sakes, girl," Mrs. Winters greeted her at the door, wiping flour-covered hands on a faded apron. "That baby's got a set of lungs like a steam whistle. Been crying for you this past hour." Lucy thanked the woman and took her fussing daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet milk scent of her hair. "There now, little one. Mama's home." Mrs. Winters lingered in the doorway. "Any luck with them railroad folk?" Lucy settled into the rocking chair by the window, loosening her bodice to feed Hannah. "Not yet, but I'll try again tomorrow." The older woman's face softened with something worse than mockery, genuine pity. "Lucy, dear, maybe it's time to accept that Redemption Springs isn't meant for railroads and progress. Your James is gone. Perhaps you ought to consider your brother's offer to move east." Lucy stared out the window at the vast Wyoming landscape, golden in the late afternoon light. "This is my home, Mrs. Winters. Our home. James believed this town could be something. I won't abandon his dream. Dreams don't feed babies, girl." After Mrs. Winters left, Lucy sat in growing darkness, rocking Hannah long after she'd fallen asleep. The cottage walls seemed to close in around her. She had enough money saved to last through winter, if she was careful. Come spring, she'd need to find more seamstress work or perhaps convince Mr. Pembroke to let her help in the store. When Hannah was settled in her cradle, Lucy lit a lamp and pulled out fresh paper from her dwindling supply. Tonight she would write to the Union Pacific. Perhaps they would see what the others could not, that Redemption Springs sat at a natural junction point, that the nearby hills contained copper according to James's assayer friend, that a town full of hardworking people deserved a chance to connect to the wider world. Her pen scratched across the paper long into the night. Dawn broke with the distant sound of hoofbeats. Lucy, who had fallen asleep at her small writing desk, jerked awake and rushed to check on Hannah. The baby slept peacefully, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. The hoofbeats grew louder, followed by shouts from the direction of town. Lucy splashed water on her face, pinned up her chestnut hair, and changed quickly into a simple blue dress, her one respite from morning attire, and only because she couldn't afford a proper black wardrobe. She scooped up Hannah, wrapped her in a blanket despite the early morning warmth, and stepped onto the porch. A cloud of dust approached from town riders, at least 10 of them, moving fast. Leading them was Sheriff Morgan, his badge catching the first rays of sunlight. Behind him rode men she recognized as ranch hands from the Diamond K, the largest cattle operation in the territory. The riders thundered to a stop before her small house. "Mrs. Barton," the sheriff called, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to disturb you so early. We've got trouble." Lucy stepped down from the porch, Hannah stirring against her shoulder. "What kind of trouble, Sheriff?" "Cattle rustlers hit the Diamond K last night. Took near 50 head. He gestured to the grim-faced cowboys behind him. "We're forming a posse. Tracks lead southwest." "What does this have to do with me?" Lucy asked, though a cold knot was already forming in her stomach. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "We need every able man and, well, your place is the last before open country. Thought you should know we'll be gone a few days. Town'll be short-handed." The unspoken meaning hung in the air. A widow alone would be vulnerable. "I'll be fine, Sheriff. Thank you for the warning." As the men prepared to ride on, one of them separated from the group and approached. Lucy didn't recognize him at first. He wasn't one of the local cowboys who frequented town. This man sat tall in the saddle, his features half hidden beneath the shadow of a well-worn hat. He guided his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, directly to her porch steps. "Madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as not from Wyoming territory. "Kieran Hayward, new foreman at the Diamond K." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. "Lucy Barton," she replied, shifting Hannah to her other shoulder. "This is my daughter, Hannah." The man Kieran looked at the baby with unexpected gentleness in his weathered face.
"Pretty little thing."
His eyes returned to Lucy. "Sheriff says you live alone out here." "We manage just fine, Mr. Hayward." He nodded, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "Those rustlers are desperate men. If they circle back this way." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a Remington revolver. "You know how to use one of these?" Lucy almost laughed. "My father was a buffalo hunter, Mr. Hayward. I could shoot before I could read." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good." He handed her the gun. "It's loaded. 5 shots. I can count bullets too, Mr. Hayward." This time the smile spread across his face, transforming his stern features. "I don't doubt it, Mrs. Barton." He replaced his hat and turned his horse. "We should be back by nightfall tomorrow. Lock your doors." Lucy watched as he rejoined the posse, something stirring in her chest that she quickly suppressed. She had no business noticing the way the morning light caught in a stranger's hair, or how his smile seemed to reach his eyes. James was barely cold in his grave. She spent the day watching the horizon, the Remington never far from reach. As darkness fell with no sign of the posse's return, Lucy barred the door and windows, placed Hannah in her cradle beside the bed, and tried to sleep with the revolver beneath her pillow. The sound of breaking glass shattered the night. Lucy was on her feet in an instant, gun in hand. Hannah began to cry as heavy footsteps moved through the front room of the small house. "Quiet in there," a harsh voice commanded. "We know you're alone, woman. We don't want no trouble. Just supplies and whatever cash your dead husband left behind." Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved silently to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. 2 men stood in her front yard, while at least one more was already inside. In the moonlight, she could make out the silhouettes of horses tied to her fence post. The rustlers. They doubled back, just as Kieran had warned. "I have a gun," she called out, her voice steadier than her hands. "And I know how to use it." Laughter echoed from the front room. "That's what they all say, lady. Now, we're coming in. You shoot at us, and things'll go badly for you and that baby." Lucy's mind raced. She couldn't fight 3 or more men, not while protecting Hannah. Her gaze fell on the loose floorboard in the corner, where she kept James's savings $38.16, all that stood between her daughter and starvation. Rapid calculations flashed through her mind. The men would take the money, perhaps the food from her pantry. If she cooperated, maybe they'd leave without harming them. If she resisted... The bedroom door crashed open. A burly man with a week's growth of beard stood in the doorway, a knife glinting in his hand. "Well, well, aren't you a pretty widow?" His eyes shifted to Hannah, whose cries had become frightened wails. "Shut that brat up." Lucy raised the Remington. "Get out of my house." The man grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "You won't shoot. Not with the little one right there." He took a step forward. Lucy aimed at the ceiling and fired. The report was deafening in the small room, plaster dust raining down as Hannah screamed louder. The man lunged. Lucy swung the gun toward him and pulled the trigger again. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward with a howl of pain and rage. He crashed into the dresser, sending James's shaving kit and Lucy's hairbrush clattering to the floor. "She shot me," he bellowed. "The bitch shot me." Footsteps pounded through the house as his companions responded to his cries. Lucy grabbed Hannah from the cradle and backed toward the window, the gun still trained on the wounded man who cursed and clutched his bleeding shoulder. "Stay back," she warned as shadows appeared in the doorway. "You're dead," snarled one of the newcomers, a rail-thin man with a face like a hatchet. "Dead as your husband." A gunshot cracked outside, followed by another. The men froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Micah? Jenkins?" A voice called from the yard. "The law's here. Come out with your hands up." Lucy recognized that voice, Kieran Hayward. The wounded man on her floor looked at his companions. "The posse must have followed our trail. We gotta go back door." The men retreated, leaving Lucy trembling with Hannah clutched to her chest. More gunshots sounded, followed by shouts and the thunder of hooves. Then silence fell, heavy and absolute. "Mrs. Barton?" Kieran's voice came again, closer to the house. "Lucy? Are you all right in there?" Lucy sank to the floor, the Remington falling from her nerveless fingers. "We're here," she called, her voice breaking. "In the bedroom." Kieran appeared in the doorway, his own revolver drawn, hat gone, and a smear of blood on his shirt sleeve. His eyes swept the room, taking in the wounded wrestler's blood on the floor and Lucy huddled with Hannah. "You're hurt," he said, holstering his weapon and crossing to her in 2 long strides. "It's not my blood," Lucy whispered, looking down at the crimson stains on her nightgown. Hannah had quieted to hiccuping sobs, her little face red and tear-streaked. "I shot him." She couldn't finish the sentence. Kieran knelt beside her, his hand hesitantly touching her shoulder. "You did what you had to do. Sheriff's rounding up the ones that tried to run." His eyes held hers, steady and calm. "You're safe now." Lucy hadn't cried since James's funeral, not when the first railroad company rejected her proposal, not when Mr. Pembroke refused to extend her credit at the store, not even when she'd had to sell James's pocket watch to buy milk for Hannah. But now, with this stranger's hand warm on her shoulder, the tears came in a flood that wouldn't be stopped. To her surprise, Kieran didn't pull away in embarrassment as most men would. Instead, he awkwardly patted her back, then grew more confident, his arm coming around her shoulders while being careful not to disturb Hannah. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met," he said quietly. "Most men I know wouldn't have stood their ground against 3 armed rustlers." Lucy wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I didn't feel brave. I was terrified. That's what makes it brave." He stood and helped her to her feet. "Let me heat some water. The sheriff will want to talk to you, but first you should clean up and change." While the sheriff questioned the captured rustlers outside, Kieran moved through Lucy's small house with surprising domesticity, heating water on her stove and finding clean linens in her dresser drawer without being told where to look. He tactfully stepped outside while she washed Hannah and herself, changing into her blue dress again since her nightgown was ruined. When she emerged onto the porch with Hannah calm in her arms, the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern plains. The sheriff had the 3 rustlers bound and mounted on their own horses, ready to transport to the jail in town. "Mrs. Barton." Sheriff Morgan touched his hat. "Mighty impressive shooting. Seems like Hayward here was right to leave his revolver with you." Lucy nodded tiredly. "Will there be charges against me, Sheriff?" The lawman looked shocked at the question. "Charges? For defending yourself and your child from outlaws?" "Not in this territory, madam. These men will hang for rustling, and attempted robbery will just add to their sins." He nodded to Kieran. "Hayward, you staying to see to the lady's house?" Kieran glanced at Lucy. "If Mrs. Barton has no objection." Lucy found she had none. The thought of being alone in the house where violence had erupted just hours before made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I would appreciate the help, Mr. Hayward." After the sheriff departed with his prisoners, Kieran helped Lucy clean up the broken glass and bloodstains. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable one. When Hannah began to fuss, Kieran offered to make breakfast while Lucy tended to her daughter. "You cook?" Lucy asked, unable to hide her surprise. Kieran smiled that transformative smile again. 7 years as a trail cook on cattle drives from Texas to Montana. I can manage bacon and coffee without burning down your house. While Hannah nursed, Lucy watched Kieran move efficiently around her small kitchen. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with the lean, muscular build of a man who'd spent his life in hard physical labor. His hands, though calloused, were deft as they cracked eggs into her cast iron skillet. "Why did you come back?" Lucy asked suddenly. "The posse was headed southwest, but you returned here." Kieran kept his eyes on the cooking eggs. Something didn't sit right. The trail was too obvious, like they wanted us to follow. "I figured it might be a diversion." He glanced at her. "And I remembered you were out here alone. So you broke away from the posse?" He nodded. "Sheriff wasn't happy, but I convinced him to let me and 2 others double back. Good thing we did." He slid a plate of eggs and bacon across the table to her. "You write a lot of letters." The non sequitur surprised her. "What?" He nodded toward her writing desk, where last night's unfinished letter to the Union Pacific lay beside a stack of previous correspondence. "Folks in town say you're trying to bring the railroad here." Lucy stiffened, expecting the mockery that usually followed any mention of her letter-writing campaign. "Yes." Kieran sat across from her, sipping coffee from one of her chipped cups. "Why?" The simple question, asked without a trace of condescension, caught Lucy off guard. "Because without it, Redemption Springs will die. The cattle operations need a way to get their herds to market without costly drives. The copper in the North Hills needs a way to reach refineries. And people here need access to medicine, supplies, and the wider world." Kieran studied her over the rim of his cup. "Your husband believed in this too?" "James was certain the railroad would save this town. He spent our first year of marriage surveying possible routes through the territory." The familiar ache of loss tightened her throat. "He died believing the rail would come. I won't let that belief die with him. Even though everyone laughs." Lucy met his gaze steadily. "Hope isn't something to be ashamed of, Mr. Hayward." Something shifted in his storm-gray eyes. "No," he said softly. "I don't suppose it is." He left after breakfast, returning to the Diamond K with a promise to check on her in a few days. Lucy found herself watching the horizon long after he disappeared from view, Hannah sleeping peacefully in her arms. The town's reaction to the rustler incident was mixed. Some, like Sheriff Morgan, praised Lucy's courage. Others whispered that a proper widow wouldn't have shot a man, that she should have surrendered peacefully and trusted in the Lord's protection. Mr. Pembroke pointedly mentioned that bullets cost money when Lucy came to purchase supplies. But the most surprising reaction came 3 days later when Kieran Hayward rode up to her cottage leading a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze down her nose. Mr. Hayward, Lucy greeted him from the porch where she was hanging laundry, Hannah sleeping in a basket nearby. "What brings you back to my door?" Kieran dismounted, leading both horses to her fence. "Thought you might need transportation, Mrs. Barton. Walking to town with a baby isn't easy, especially with winter coming on." Lucy stared at the mare. "I can't accept a horse, Mr. Hayward." "You're not accepting it. You're boarding it." He tied both horses to the fence post. "Diamond K has too many horses since we lost those cattle. Boss is looking to reduce the herd before winter feeding starts. This mare's good-natured but too small for ranch work. She'd be perfect for a lady and child." Lucy knew it was a convenient fiction, but pride warred with practicality in her mind. A horse would indeed make her life easier, allowing her to reach town quickly if Hannah needed medicine, or if there was trouble. Still, "I can't pay for boarding," she said finally. Kieran removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of him choosing his words carefully. "What if we made a trade?" He nodded toward her writing desk visible through the open door. "I heard you're a fair hand with letters. Diamond K could use someone to help with correspondence contracts, supply orders, that sort of thing." Lucy narrowed her eyes. The Diamond K has never needed a letter writer before. Kieran's mouth quirked up at one corner. "The Diamond K has a new foreman who can't spell worth a damn. My boss threatened to replace me if I send one more order for cattle feed instead of cattle feed." A laugh escaped Lucy before she could stop it, her first genuine laugh in months. "And this horse is my payment for correcting your spelling?" "Room and board for the mare, plus $2 a month for any letters you write for the ranch." He held her gaze. "It's honest work, Mrs. Barton. It was charity wrapped in the guise of employment, and they both knew it. But it was offered in a way that allowed her to maintain her dignity. And $2 a month would make all the difference in her precarious finances." "I accept," Lucy said, extending her hand as she would to close a business arrangement. "On a trial basis." Kieran's large, calloused hand engulfed hers, his grip firm but gentle. "I'll bring the ranch correspondence by next Sunday, if that suits you." And so began a new chapter in Lucy's life. Each Sunday, Kieran would ride to her cottage with a satchel of papers, supply lists, correspondence with cattle buyers, occasionally personal letters dictated by ranch hands to sweethearts or family back east. Lucy would spend the week transforming their rough notes into proper business letters, her elegant handwriting and precise language lending an air of sophistication to the Diamond K's affairs. Kieran always arrived in mid-afternoon and stayed for supper, a habit that began when Lucy insisted on feeding him in addition to his payment for her services. He proved to be an appreciative audience for her cooking, praising even simple meals of beans and cornbread, as if they were fine dining. As autumn progressed toward winter, Lucy found herself looking forward to Sundays with an eagerness that both excited and frightened her. She told herself it was merely the adult conversation she craved after days with only an infant for company. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when she spotted Kieran's tall figure on the horizon, or the way she'd taken to wearing her blue dress rather than her faded black one when she expected him. The townsfolk noticed. Mrs. Winters, who still helped with Hannah occasionally, didn't bother to hide her approval. "That Hayward fellow has a good look about him," she commented one Wednesday while rocking Hannah. "Steady eyes. Hard worker. Not like some of these drifters that blow through town." "He's my employer, Mrs. Winters," Lucy replied primly, sorting through the week's correspondence. Nothing more. The older woman snorted. Employer who rides 20 miles every Sunday just to bring you a few letters to write? Who fixed your leaky roof last week and chopped enough firewood to last half the winter? Don't treat me like I'm simple-minded, girl. Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's being neighborly. Neighborly, Mrs. Winters echoed with a knowing smile. Is that what they're calling it these days? Despite her embarrassment, Lucy couldn't deny that Kieran had become more than just an employer. He was a friend, perhaps her only true friend in Redemption Springs. He listened to her ideas about the railroad without mockery, sometimes offering practical suggestions about her approach to the companies. He never spoke of James with the maudlin pity others did, but rather asked questions about the man Lucy had loved, seeming genuinely interested in knowing what kind of person he had been. And he adored Hannah. The gruff cowboy who commanded the respect of hardened ranch hands would become gentle as a lamb when Lucy placed her daughter in his arms. Hannah, now 6 months old and beginning to develop a personality beyond eating and sleeping, would break into toothless grins at the sight of him, reaching for his hat or the bandana around his neck. One Sunday in late November, Kieran arrived during a heavy snowfall that had begun that morning. Lucy ushered him in quickly, taking his snow-covered coat and hat. "You shouldn't have come in this weather," she scolded, hanging his things by the fire to dry. The correspondence could have waited. Kieran stamped snow from his boots. "And miss your venison stew?" "Not likely." He reached into his saddlebag and produced a paper-wrapped package. "Besides, I brought something for Hannah." The something turned out to be a small wooden horse, skillfully carved and sanded smooth. "Did you make this?" Lucy asked, running her finger over the detailed mane and tail. Kieran shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Had some time in the evenings. Winter nights get long at the bunkhouse." Lucy placed the carving on the mantel, where Hannah could see it but not yet reach it. "It's beautiful. Thank you." They ate supper as usual, talking about ranch business and town gossip. The storm outside intensified, wind howling around the eaves of the small cottage. When the meal was finished, and they sat drinking coffee by the fire, Anna already asleep in her cradle, Lucy found herself reluctant for the evening to end, knowing Kieran would soon brave the blizzard for his ride back to the Diamond K. "You can't go out in this," she said finally as the wind rattled the window panes. "You'd freeze before you made it halfway to the ranch." Kieran looked toward the window, his expression confirming her assessment. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition to save your life." Lucy stood and began gathering blankets from the chest in the corner. "You can sleep by the fire. It's warm enough there." The awkwardness of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. A single woman, a widow, no less, offering shelter to an unmarried man would set tongues wagging from Redemption Springs to Cheyenne if word got out. But the alternative was sending him into a deadly Wyoming blizzard. "Thank you," Kieran said simply, helping her arrange the blankets into a makeshift bed on the floor before the hearth. They sat by the fire a while longer, their conversation drifting to more personal topics than usual. Kieran spoke of his childhood in Kentucky, his father's horse farm, and his decision to head west at 19 after his parents died of influenza within months of each other. "I was angry," he admitted, staring into the flames. "Angry at God. Angry at the world. Thought I'd work myself to death on cattle drives." A rueful smile crossed his face. "Turns out life had other plans." "How did you end up at the Diamond K?" Lucy asked, drawing her shawl closer around her shoulders as the fire began to die down. "Drove a herd up from Texas last spring. Foreman position opened when the old foreman decided to head to California. Owner liked that I could handle men as well as cattle." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did a buffalo hunter's daughter end up in Redemption Springs?" Lucy smiled at the memory. "I met James at a church social in Laramie. He was passing through, surveying for the railroad. Talked of nothing but track gauges and grade percentages all evening." She laughed softly. Most of the girls thought he was terribly dull, but I found it fascinating, the idea of connecting places, of building something that would last generations. You loved him very much, Kieran observed quietly. I did. Lucy's throat tightened. When he died, everyone expected me to sell our house and move back to my brother in Laramie. But this was our dream, James's and mine. I couldn't abandon it. That's why the railroad matters so much to you. Lucy nodded. It's not just about commerce or convenience. It's about fulfilling a promise. Kieran was silent for a long moment. Your hope. It's like a light in the darkness. Most folks around here gave up on this town years ago. His voice dropped lower. Sometimes I think your hope is the only thing keeping Redemption Springs alive. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond their simple truth. Lucy felt something stir in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire before them. It's late, she said finally, rising from her chair. We should get some sleep. Morning broke clear and brilliant, the world transformed into a glittering white landscape. Lucy woke to find Kieran already up, stoking the fire and heating water for coffee. Hannah babbled happily in her cradle, reaching for the wooden horse Kieran had placed within her view. Good morning, he greeted her, seeming perfectly at ease despite the unusual circumstances. Hope you don't mind. Thought I'd get the fire going before you, and the little one woke up. Lucy brushed a strand of hair from her face, acutely aware of her rumpled appearance. Thank you. I'll make breakfast. They moved around each other in the small space with surprising comfort, as if they'd shared countless mornings instead of just this one. After breakfast, Kieran reluctantly prepared to leave, the responsibilities of the ranch calling him back despite the deep snow. I'll try to come by midweek, he said as he donned his coat and hat. Make sure you and Hannah have everything you need. This snow might keep us all homebound for a while. Lucy handed him a package of leftover biscuits wrapped in a cloth. We'll be fine. The mare needs feeding, though. Already done. He smiled. While you were still sleeping. At the door, he paused, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. Finally, he simply touched the brim of his hat. Thank you, Lucy, for the shelter and the company. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her breath catch. You're welcome, Kieran. After he left, Lucy stood at the window watching his figure grow smaller against the vast white prairie, Hannah balanced on her hip. Well, she whispered to her daughter, it seems we've made a friend. The blizzard of 1879–1880 would later be remembered as one of the worst in Wyoming's history. Snow fell consistently through December and into January, leaving Redemption Springs effectively isolated from the outside world. The town survived on stockpiled supplies and the occasional brave soul who managed the dangerous journey to the larger settlement of Laramie for essentials. True to his word, Kieran checked on Lucy and Hannah regularly, sometimes battling through snowdrifts taller than his horse to reach their cottage. He brought supplies from the Diamond Case store's flour, coffee, sugar, and once, miraculously, an orange that Lucy divided into segments and savored over 3 days. On Christmas Eve, he appeared with a small fir tree strapped to his saddle and a package containing a length of calico fabric for Lucy and a knitted cap for Hannah. The ranch owner's wife sent these, he explained as Lucy unwrapped the gifts. Said every child should have something new at Christmas. Lucy fingered the bright calico, already imagining the dress she would make from it. Please thank her for me. She hesitated, then retrieved a package from behind the stove. I have something for you too. Kieran unwrapped the gift, a pair of leather gloves Lucy had worked on late into the night for the past week, using scraps from James's old saddlebags. The stitching was neat and strong, the leather oiled to suppleness. I noticed your old ones were wearing through, she explained, suddenly shy. These aren't fancy, but they should be warm. Kieran slipped them on, flexing his fingers with an expression of wonder. They fit perfectly. He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the light from the fire. No one's made me anything since my mother died. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, squeezed Lucy's heart. On impulse, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Merry Christmas, Kieran." He stared at her, a flush rising from his collar that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. "Merry Christmas, Lucy." That night, after Kieran had gone and Hannah was asleep beside the decorated fir tree, Lucy sat at her writing desk and composed her 23rd letter about the railroad, this one to a senator in Washington who had connections to the Union Pacific. As her pen moved across the paper, she realized something had changed. The letters were no longer just about fulfilling James's dream or saving the town. They were about creating a future that, more and more, she found herself imagining with Kieran in it. The thought should have brought guilt. Instead, it brought a quiet peace, as if James himself were giving his blessing from wherever his spirit now resided. January brought more snow and the first real hardship to Redemption Springs. Food supplies began to run low, and illness spread through the town of violent influenza that claimed 3 lives in the first week of the month. Lucy, isolated in her cottage on the outskirts, heard the news from Kieran and kept Hannah indoors, away from potential contagion. Then, in the 3rd week of January, Kieran didn't come on his regular visit. Lucy told herself not to worry. The snow had been particularly heavy, the trails nearly impassable. Perhaps ranch duties had kept him busy. But as one day stretched into 3, anxiety gnawed at her. On the 4th day, with the sky finally clear, Lucy bundled Hannah tightly, saddled the mare Kieran had brought her, and rode toward the Diamond K. The journey was slow and difficult, the mare struggling through deep snow drifts, but Lucy's determination drove them forward. The ranch came into view by mid-afternoon, a collection of buildings nestled in a protected valley, smoke rising from chimneys. As Lucy approached, a ranch hand she recognized as one of Kieran's men spotted her and hurried to help her dismount. "Mrs. Barton, what in tarnation are you doing out in this weather with a baby?" "Where's Mr. Hayward?" Lucy asked, clutching Hannah to her chest. "He hasn't come by, and I was worried." The man's face fell.
"He's sick, madam.
Got the influenza about 4 days ago. Been laid up in his cabin ever since." Lucy's heart clenched. "How bad?" "Doc from town came yesterday. Said the fever's high, but he's strong. Got a good chance if the fever breaks soon." He glanced toward a small cabin set apart from the bunkhouse. "He's been asking for you, when the fever lets him talk sense." Lucy didn't hesitate. "Take me to him." The ranch hand looked uncomfortable. "Madam, it ain't proper. Propriety be damned," Lucy snapped, then immediately apologized for her language.
"Please."
"He checked on us all winter. I need to make sure he's all right." The cabin was warm but dark, the curtains drawn against the bright snow-reflected light that might hurt feverish eyes. Kieran lay on a narrow bed, his large frame seeming diminished somehow, his face flushed with fever. A basin of water sat on a table nearby, a cloth floating in it. Lucy handed Hannah to the reluctant ranch hand. "Please take her to the main house. Ask if someone can watch her for a bit." When the man hesitated, she added, "I've nursed influenza before. I know what to do." After they left, Lucy removed her coat and rolled up her sleeves. She dipped the cloth in water, wrung it out, and placed it on Kieran's forehead. He stirred at the touch, his eyes fluttering open. "Lucy." His voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. "I'm here," she said, smoothing damp hair back from his face. "You should have sent word you were ill." A ghost of his familiar smile crossed his cracked lips. "Didn't want to worry you." "Well, I worried anyway." She helped him sit up enough to sip water from a cup. "You've been taking care of us all winter. Now it's my turn." For the next several hours, Lucy bathed Kieran's face and neck with cool water, helped him drink whenever he woke, and spooned broth into him that the ranch cook brought over. Hannah was being thoroughly spoiled at the main house, according to the ranch hand who checked in periodically, charming the owner's wife with her newly discovered ability to clap her hands. As evening approached, Kieran's fever seemed to intensify rather than break. He tossed restlessly, sometimes calling out names Lucy didn't recognize, perhaps family members long dead, or comrades from his cattle drive days. During one lucid moment, he grasped her hand with surprising strength. "If I don't make it," he began. Lucy pressed her fingers against his lips. "Don't. You're going to be fine." His eyes, bright with fever, held hers. "Listen," Diamond K owner promised. "If anything happened to me, you'd still get paid for the letters. And keep the mare." Tears stung Lucy's eyes. "I don't care about any of that. Need to know you and Hannah. We'll be all right." "We need you to be all right," Lucy whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. "I need you." Kieran's eyes widened slightly, then drifted closed as exhaustion claimed him again. Lucy continued her vigil through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair beside his bed, but never leaving his side. Near dawn, she woke to find him watching her, his eyes clearer than they had been since she arrived. "Your fever broke," she said, touching his forehead to confirm what she could already see. The burning heat had subsided to merely unusual warmth. "You stayed," he murmured, wonder in his voice. Lucy smoothed the blanket covering him. "Of course I stayed." "Why?" The simple question demanded an honest answer. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." Kieran's hand found hers atop the blanket. "I've been wanting to tell you something." He took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "Those letters you write about the railroad. I've been sending copies to my cousin in Chicago." Lucy stared at him. "What?" "He works for the Northwestern Pacific. Junior position, but he has the ear of some important men." Kieran's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "He wrote back last month. Said your arguments were compelling. That he'd pass them up the chain." Hope flared in Lucy's chest, bright and painful. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Didn't want to get your hopes up. Railroad companies make promises they don't keep all the time." A tired smile touched his lips. "But my cousin thinks there's a real chance. The route you mapped makes sense. And the copper deposits are more valuable now with all the electrical wiring being installed back east." Lucy couldn't speak, her throat too tight with emotion. Kieran continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I believe in your dream, Lucy. Not just because it was your husband's, but because it's right. This town deserves a chance." His fingers tightened around hers. "You deserve a chance." 3 days later, with Kieran recovered enough to travel short distances, Lucy returned to her cottage with Hannah and a promise from Kieran to visit as soon as he was fully well. The town was beginning to emerge from the grip of both winter and illness, the warming February sun hinting at an eventual spring. Lucy threw herself into her letter writing with renewed vigor, now corresponding directly with Kieran's cousin in Chicago, who provided invaluable insights into the workings of railroad companies and the arguments most likely to sway their decisions. By early March, when the snow began to melt in earnest and the first crocuses pushed through the muddy earth outside her cottage, Lucy received a letter that changed everything. The Northwestern Pacific was sending a survey team to Redemption Springs to assess the viability of a spur line connecting to their main track 30 miles north. The town exploded with excitement at the news. Even Mr. Pembroke, who had been among the loudest mockers of Lucy's foolish letter writing, now claimed he'd always seen the potential in her efforts. The survey team was expected by late April, assuming the spring thaw continued and the roads became passable. Kieran, fully recovered and back to his duties at the Diamond K, shared in Lucy's triumph with undisguised pride. "You did it," he told her one Sunday afternoon as they walked along the creek behind her cottage, Hannah toddling between them, each tiny hand gripping one of theirs. You kept hoping when everyone else had given up. Lucy smiled, watching her daughter's delight at a butterfly that fluttered past. We're not there yet. The survey team might decide against us. They won't. Kieran's certainty warmed her. And even if they did, you'd just keep writing letters until someone listened. They reached a fallen log and sat, Hannah happily exploring the new spring grass at their feet. The air smelled of damp earth and possibility. I've been thinking, Kieran said after a comfortable silence, about the future. Lucy glanced at him. What about it? He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, turning his hat in his hands. When the railroad comes, Redemption Springs will grow. New opportunities will come with it. Yes, that's the hope. I've been saving money. Almost enough for a down payment on a small spread of my own. He looked at her directly. I was thinking, maybe a place not too far from town. Close enough for a woman to still run a letter-writing business if she wanted. Or maybe a proper shop someday. Lucy's heart began to beat faster. That sounds practical. The thing is, Kieran continued, his voice growing softer, a man shouldn't plan a future without making his intentions clear to those who might be part of it. He set his hat aside and took both of Lucy's hands in his. I know it hasn't been a full year since you lost James. I know you might not be ready, but I need you to know that I love you, Lucy Barton. You and Hannah both. Tears welled in Lucy's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. Kieran, you don't have to answer now, he rushed on. I can wait. However long you need. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here. Lucy squeezed his hands. James will always be part of me, she said carefully. He was my first love and Hannah's father. I won't pretend otherwise. I would never ask you to, Kieran assured her. But, Lucy continued, a smile breaking through her tears, my heart didn't die with him. It's very much alive. And it's been yours for longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. Kieran's face transformed with hope. Lucy, are you saying? I'm saying I love you too, she whispered. And I don't want to wait to start our future. He gathered her into his arms then, his kiss gentle but full of promise. Hannah chose that moment to toddle back to them, patting their legs for attention. Kieran laughed and scooped her up, settling her on his knee. What do you think, little miss? Would you mind terribly if I asked to be your paw? Hannah's response was to grab his nose with delighted fingers, making them both laugh. The survey team arrived in Redemption Springs on a perfect April morning, for men in city clothes with instruments and notebooks, ready to assess the town's potential as a railroad stop. Lucy, standing on the porch of her cottage with Kieran beside her and Hannah in her arms, watched them ride in with a sense of completion rather than anxiety. Whatever happened now, she had already won the most important victory. She had kept hope alive, not just for a town or a railroad, but for herself. That hope, once mocked and dismissed, had become the light that guided her through her darkest days and led her to a love she never expected to find again. The town that had laughed at her perseverance now looked to her as its savior. The man at her side had seen her hope as strength rather than foolishness. And the future stretched before them, as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky. Ready? Kieran asked, offering his arm to escort her into town to meet the survey team. Lucy smiled up at him, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Ready. May arrived with a symphony of birdsong and the sweet scent of wild prairie flowers. The survey team had completed their assessment and departed 2 weeks earlier, promising a decision from the railroad executives within the month. Redemption Springs held its collective breath, but the waiting seemed different now, tinged with genuine optimism rather than desperate hope. Lucy stood in the center of her cottage, turning slowly to take in the empty shelves and packed trunks. The small house that had sheltered her through grief and new beginnings looked larger somehow, the afternoon sun streaming through windows that no longer held curtains. That's the last of it, Kieran announced, entering with Hannah perched on his shoulders. The little girl had recently celebrated her first birthday with a small party that half the town attended. Many of the same people who had once whispered behind Lucy's back now bringing gifts and well wishes. "It doesn't seem possible," Lucy said, running her hand along the worn writing desk where she'd composed so many letters. "Leaving this place." Kieran set Hannah down to explore the familiar yet transformed space. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Lucy assured him, moving to his side. "Just remembering." The Diamond K's owner had offered them the foreman's cabin as a temporary home, while Kieran finalized the purchase of a small ranch 5 miles from town, close enough for Lucy to maintain her connections in Redemption Springs, but with enough land for Kieran to run a modest herd of cattle. They would be married the following Sunday in the town's small church, a ceremony that somehow the entire community had taken an interest in planning. "James would be happy," Lucy said softly, watching Hannah toddle across the bare wooden floor. "To know Hannah will grow up with a father who loves her. To know his dream for the town might come true." Kieran wrapped an arm around her waist. "He chose well when he chose you. Not many women would have carried his hope forward the way you did." Lucy leaned into his embrace. "It became my hope too, and now it's ours." A commotion outside drew their attention, the sound of horses and men's voices calling out. Kieran moved to the window, then turned to Lucy with wide eyes. "It's a rider from Laramie. Looks like he's got an official letter." They hurried outside to join the gathering crowd in the center of town. The rider, dust-covered and weary, was already handing a sealed envelope to Sheriff Morgan. "Telegram came through to Laramie yesterday," the rider announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Northwestern Pacific made their decision. Sheriff's got the official notice." Sheriff Morgan broke the seal with trembling fingers. The crowd fell silent as he unfolded the paper and began to read. "To the citizens of Redemption Springs, Wyoming Territory. After careful consideration of the survey team's report and assessment of economic potential, the Board of Directors of the Northwestern Pacific Railroad is pleased to announce approval for construction of a spur line to your settlement, with work to commence this summer." The rest of the letter was drowned out by cheers and shouts. Men threw their hats in the air. Women embraced each other with tears streaming down their faces. Mr. Pembroke began ringing the bell outside his store with such enthusiasm it seemed likely to crack. In the midst of the celebration, Lucy stood motionless, unable to fully comprehend that the dream she had fought so hard for was actually becoming reality. Then Kieran was lifting her off her feet, spinning her in a circle as Hannah clapped and squealed from her perch in Mrs. Winter's arms. "You did it," he shouted over the noise. "You saved this town, Lucy Barton." Lucy laughed through her tears. "We did it. All of us, together." Later that evening, after the impromptu celebration had moved to the saloon and then dispersed as families returned home to share the momentous news, Lucy and Kieran sat on the porch of her cottage their last night there before moving to the Diamond K the next day. Hannah slept peacefully inside, exhausted from the excitement. The spring air was cool but pleasant, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Lucy's head rested against Kieran's shoulder, his arm around her, keeping her warm. "I was thinking," Kieran said, his voice rumbling beneath her ear, "about what you said earlier. About hope. What about it? When I first came to Redemption Springs, I wasn't looking for anything permanent. Just another job, another town that would eventually fade behind me." He shifted to look into her eyes. "Then I met a widow who everyone laughed at for believing in something better, for hoping when there seemed to be no reason to hope." Lucy touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. And I realized that your hope was the light I needed most. It showed me a way forward when I'd been drifting for years." His hand covered hers. "You saved more than this town, Lucy. You saved me." Under a sky full of stars, with the promise of the railroad on the horizon and a new life about to begin, Lucy kissed the man who had seen strength in her hope when others saw only foolishness. The kiss held the memory of all they had overcome and the promise of all that lay ahead: a family united, a town reborn, and a love born from the most unexpected circumstances. "Hope is never foolish," she whispered against his lips. "Not when it leads us home." 3 years later, on a crisp September morning in 1883, Lucy stood on the newly constructed platform of Redemption Springs Station, Hannah's hand in hers, and her newborn son James Kieran Hayward cradled in her other arm. Beside them, Kieran straightened his tie, an unusual concession to formality for a man more comfortable in ranch clothes than the suit he now wore as both rancher and recently elected town councilman. The platform was crowded with nearly every resident of Redemption Springs, which had almost doubled in population since the railroad's arrival the previous year. New buildings lined Main Street: a proper hotel, a second general store, a milliner shop, and the office of the Redemption Springs Gazette, where Lucy's letters and articles about local events were now published weekly. In the distance, a whistle sounded, and a plume of smoke appeared on the horizon. The crowd's excited murmurs grew louder. "Here it comes." Hannah, now 4 years old and articulate beyond her years, bounced on her toes. The special train. Today's train was indeed special, carrying the governor of the Wyoming Territory and several railroad executives who were officially commemorating the completion of the Redemption Springs line. The town had selected Kieran to give the welcoming speech, but Lucy knew he was nervous about addressing such distinguished visitors. "You'll do wonderfully," she assured him, adjusting baby James in her arms. Kieran smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all this time. "As long as you're beside me, I can do anything." The train pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and the squeal of brakes. Polished passenger cars gleamed in the morning sun, a stark contrast to the first freight engine that had arrived during construction, covered in dust and pulling cars loaded with rails and timber. As the governor and railroad men descended from the train to applause, Lucy caught sight of Mr. Pembroke standing nearby. The shopkeeper, who had once mocked her letter writing, now nodded respectfully in her direction. Next to him stood Mrs. Winters, who had become a devoted grandmother figure to both Hannah and baby James. The mayor stepped forward to introduce Kieran, who moved to the small podium set up for the occasion. Lucy watched with pride as her husband, still sometimes a surprise to think of him that way, cleared his throat and began to speak. "Governor, distinguished guests, friends, and neighbors. We gather today to celebrate not just a railroad, but the power of persistence and hope." As Kieran's strong voice carried across the platform, Lucy felt Hannah lean against her skirts. "Mama," the little girl whispered, "did you really make the railroad come to our town?" Lucy smiled down at her daughter. "Not alone, sweetheart. It took many people working together. But Papa says your letters started it all. He says you had hope when nobody else did." Baby James stirred in Lucy's arms, his tiny face turning toward the sound of the train's settling steam. She looked from her son to her daughter, then to her husband at the podium, and finally to the bustling town that had once seemed destined to disappear from the map. "Sometimes, Hannah," she said softly, "hope is the most important thing we can carry, even when other people laugh at us for it." Hannah considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old can muster. "I'm going to carry hope too, then," she declared. "Every day." Lucy bent to kiss her daughter's head, her heart full to bursting. "That's my girl." At the podium, Kieran was concluding his speech. "And so we thank you not just for the railroad tracks that now connect us to the wider world, but for recognizing what one remarkable woman knew all along, that Redemption Springs was worth believing in." His eyes found Lucy's in the crowd. That hope, carried faithfully even through the darkest times, can light the way for us all. As applause erupted around them, Lucy held her children close and silently thanked the twists of fate that had brought her here, the grief that could have broken her, but instead had forged her strength, the mockery that could have silenced her but instead had steeled her resolve, and the love that had found her when she least expected it but needed it most. The train whistle sounded again, not a farewell but a greeting, a promise of connections yet to be made and journeys yet to be taken. For Lucy Hayward, once laughed at for carrying hope through the darkest days of widowhood, it was the sweetest music imaginable, the sound of a dream fulfilled and a future bright with possibilities. And as Kieran stepped down from the podium to rejoin his family, his eyes shining with love and pride, Lucy knew with absolute certainty that hope, carried faithfully through adversity, would always find its way home.